Noumena and Neteru. What is the nature of the noumena and how can we know them? The real differences in things have nothing to do with their being physically different. Real differences are due to different functions. The essence or hidden soul of things lies in their function, in the very nature, origin and purpose of their existence in the cosmos. The subjective differences that we sometimes feel, though we cannot grasp the true correlations they signify, are the realities of the noumenal world. There is no reason why we should represent the world as dead and mechanical. In the world of causes there can be nothing dead or inanimate. Everything represented must be conscious because the world of noumena is in itself consciousness. The soul of the world. Invisible phenomena such as the howling of the wind, the change of season, the first snow dusting the fields and adding a peculiar freshness and sharpness to the air, we can sense the expression of the feelings, thoughts and moods of that mysterious being, nature. Every stone, every grain of sand, every planet has a noumenon consisting of life and of mind, connecting them with certain wholes, larger cosmoses incomprehensible to us. This is close to what is thought about the Neteru of ancient Egypt. Causal powers, primary and secondary causes of everything that manifests itself in the universe. Principles, agents and functions of these manifestations, elements of cosmic harmony, or simply principles, forms or ideas in the Platonic sense. These functional principles can sometimes be instinctively grasped by people, leading them to imagine the netta of, say, a mountain or any other phenomena, which strikes their emotional nature. This mystical feeling of nature is often produced in humankind by animals. Almost everyone has their spirit animal with which they share some inner affinity. In those animals, or through those animals, people sense nature intimately and personally. Compare this to the idea that a plant or an animal is a symbol of a whole collection of vital elements crystallized in it, and we begin to understand why the Egyptians consciously utilized this in their symbolism. Our language is too poor to express relations of a higher order, and therefore one criterion for truth is its inexpressibility. One can speak about the real world only conditionally, approximately, through symbols. The most one can do is to hint at it, to give an impetus to thought. Truth can be conveyed only by parables, allegories, paradoxes or even lies. The Egyptian symbolic is therefore seen as the finest means for transmitting vital or supra-logical philosophy. In understanding what is involved in apprehending the noumena, Plato presents his approach. Modern humankind, however, cannot be made into Egyptian sages by telling them to stop analyzing and start synthesizing. It will hardly be of any use to simply see, i.e., to eliminate cerebral consciousness by observing, and then accepting observation without prejudice, imagination or supposition, unless one has first investigated the matter by reason as well as one can. Without an approach balanced by reason, observation can easily equal pure imagination, and it is doubtful whether this will bring us any closer to the noumena. Urbach well illustrates a process of uncovering the inner ear and undergoing various forms of training. However, this process must be complemented by training the mind in sound reasoning as well. Plato, whose pyramid of thought seems a valid tool, was not a rationalist in the present sense of the term. He did not think that philosophy should be only knowledge, but rather a kind of know-how, or skill. Greek, techna or episteme, in the sense of both the skill to achieve a certain goal and the knowledge of that goal's true nature. Plato was looking for true virtue. However, to pursue virtue, a soul would have to be in good balance. This in turn requires knowledge of the true principles of the universe. The techna of the philosopher was to learn not to fall under the influence of akasia, primitive emotion, and pistis, ordinary active-reactive thinking or belief, which can result only in the sort of doxa, uncertain opinion or fancy that one can make out of the phenomenal world. Only by properly combining episteme, pathesis, and mathesis can one hope to reach the level of reasoning called dianoia. In the methodology that Socrates offered, he proposed analyzing a question into its constituent parts, then pursuing them separately and in the end forming a synthesis of the matter. The synthesis is often left open, however, as first principles cannot be rationally formulated. It is the quest therefore of truly noetic spirits to fully realize the techna of philosophy, and thus reach an understanding of what the Egyptians spoke of as neteru. Socrates thought that philosophy had the authority that it had because it was connected with the divine. One should, however, always listen to the inner demon, otherwise philosophy will be just words. Nietzsche said that after Socrates and the demise of sophism, philosophy lost the Dionysian element and degenerated. Thereafter philosophers have only written down their prejudice and turned biographical stories into scientific formulas. Should we then remain chained in this Platonic cave as described by Plato's Republic for eternity, or can we find a way out, developing a method for apprehending true reality? Due to reliance upon our senses, experimental knowledge is not a hazy representation of the real world, it is a very vivid representation of an entirely unreal world. Deep down, a physicist, for example, may feel the real worthlessness of all new and old scientific theories, but remain afraid to be left hanging in midair with nothing but a negation. They have no system to take the place of the one whose falsity they already feel. So, lacking the courage to admit openly that they no longer believe in anything, they continue to wear all these contradictory theories like some official uniform or badge. For the sole reason that this uniform is connected with rights, funding and privilege. The phenomenal world is simply our incorrect representation of the world, a reflection or image, a finite expression of something infinite within the sphere of a three-dimensional form of perception, through the organs of sense that possessed. We do not see the whole of mind manifest, we do not know its real dimensions. The brain is simply a mirror which reflects the mind in our three-dimensional section of the world, and what lies beyond it remains unmanifest in any corporeal way. This implies that a wider consciousness may see things that are unrelated to us as parts of one whole. Things seemingly completely identical may in fact look entirely different. Everything together may form one whole, but in a category quite incomprehensible to us. Theoretically, the way to noumena is now open. So what needs to be done is change our mental apparatus or mode of perception in order to perceive it. But how to do this is of course more complex, as first we must learn to think of things in other categories, then represent them to ourselves in these categories. Perhaps this might bring us to perceiving things in higher space, and to sensing higher space itself. In two of his books, A New Era of Thought, and The Fourth Dimension, C.H. Hinton declares that space is an instrument of the mind. It is through space, he says, that we apprehend what is. Hinton feels too that we should develop our space sense. If our intuition of space is the means by which we apprehend, then it follows that there may be different kinds of intuitions of space. This intuition of space must also be colored by the conditions of the mental activity of whichever being which uses it. Geometers such as Gauss and Lobachevsky have shown us that we are quite capable of conceiving different kinds of space. Hinton suggests that it might be possible for there to be beings living in a world such that they would conceive a space of 4 dimensions. We then ask, what is space? And can answer that space is the form of the universe or the form of matter in the universe. We say that our space is 3-dimensional. We say that space can be measured in 3 independent directions: length, breadth, and height. By independent direction we mean a line lying at right angles or perpendicular to another line. However, we also say that space is infinite. Therefore must assume logically that space has more than 3 dimensions. There are different kinds of existence though, as for example a house exists, and the idea of good and evil exists. A house is a physical fact. An idea, however, is a metaphysical fact. Physical facts and metaphysical facts both exist, but they exist quite differently. Physical things have an outer aspect and an inner concept. There is this book, and there are the contents of the book. There is this coin and there is the purchasing power of the coin. We sometimes assume that the contents of the book, the purchasing power of the coin, have no real existence, yet perhaps this inner content merely does not exist in our space. Perhaps it exists in a higher space. Matter, like force, does not present any difficulty of perception at all. We know all about it, for the very good reason that we have invented it. Matter is a creation of our conceiving, and merely a way of thinking about sensible objects, a mental substitute for concrete but unmanageably complex facts. Matter and force, however, are only concepts, just as abstract as the purchasing value of a coin, as the contents of a book. What does the world of many dimensions then represent in itself? What are these solids of many dimensions, the lines and boundaries of which we perceive as motion? A leap of the imagination is necessary to transcend the limits of our perception and to visualize mentally the world in other categories, even if it's just for a moment. Let us imagine some object, say a book, outside of time and space. What will this last mean? Were we to take the book out of time and space, it would mean that all books which have ever existed, exist now in the present and shall ever exist at some time in the future, or will exist together, i.e. occupy one and the same place and exist simultaneously, forming as it were one book which includes within itself the properties, characteristics and peculiarities of all books possible. When we say simply a book, then we have in mind something possessing the common characteristics of all books. This is a concept or the concept of a book, envisioned. However, that book, about which we are talking now, possesses not only these common characteristics but the individual characteristics of all separate books. Take then other things, a table, a house, a tree, and a man, then let's imagine them out of time and space. The mind will have to open its doors to objects each possessing such an enormous, such an infinite number of signs and characteristics, that to comprehend them by means of reason alone is impossible. If one desires to comprehend them by reason alone, then he will be forced to dismember these objects somehow, to take them at first in some single sense, from one side or angle, in one section of their being. What is man outside of space and time? He is humanity, man as the species, Homo sapien, but at the same time possessing the characteristics, peculiarities and individual earmarks of all separate men. This is you and I, and Julius Caesar together with the conspirators who killed him, and the newspaper vendor on the corner of First Avenue. All kings, all slaves, all saints, all sinners, all taken together and fused into one indivisible being of a man. Like some great living tree composed of bark, wood and dry twigs, roots, green leaves, flowers, pollen and fruit. Is it possible to conceive of and understand such a being by our reason? The idea of such a great being inspired the artist or artists who created the Sphinx. What then is motion, and why do we feel it as if it does not exist? About this last, Mabel Collins, a theosophical writer of the first period of modern theosophy, writes eloquently in her poetic Story of the Year. The entire true meaning of earthly life consists only in the mutual contact between personalities and in the efforts of growth. Those things that are called events and circumstances and which are regarded as the real contents of life are in reality only the conditions that make these contacts and this growth possible. In these words already there sounds a new understanding of the real. Truly, the illusion of motion cannot arise out of nothing. When we are traveling by rail or automobile and the trees are running and overtaking one another, then we know that all of this motion is illusory, that the trees are immobile and that the illusion of their motion is created by our own. As in these particular cases, then so too in general as regards all motion in the material world, the foundation of which, positivists, consider to be motion in the finest particles of matter. We, recognizing the motion as an illusory one, will ask, is not the illusion of this motion created by some motion inside our own consciousness? So it will be. Having established this, then we shall endeavor to define what kind of motion is going on inside of our consciousness, i.e. what is moving relative to what. The author H.P. Blavatsky, in her first book, Isis Unveiled, touched upon the same question concerning the relation of life to time and motion. She writes, as our planet revolves every year around the sun and at the same time turns once in every 24 hours upon its own axis, thus traversing minor cycles within a larger one, so too is the work of the smaller cyclic periods accomplished and recommenced. The revolution of the physical world, according to ancient doctrine, is attended by a like revolution in the world of intellect, the spiritual evolution of the world proceeding in cycles, like the physical one. Thus we see in history a regular alternation of ebb and flow in the tide of human progress. The great kingdoms and empires of the world, after reaching the culmination of their greatness, descend again in accordance with the same law by which they ascended. Till, having reached the lowest point, humanity reasserts itself and mounts up once more, the height of its attainment being by this law of ascending progression by cycles, somewhat higher than the point from which it had previously descended. The division of the history of mankind into golden, silver, copper and iron ages is not fiction. We see the same thing in the literature of peoples. An age of great inspiration and unconscious productivity is invariably followed by an age of criticism and consciousness. The one affords material for the analysis and critical intellect of the other. Thus all of those great characters who tower like giants in the history of mankind, like the Buddha Siddhartha and Jesus the Christ in the realm of spirituality, Alexander the Macedonian and Napoleon the Great in the realm of physical conquest, were but reflected images of human types that have existed 10,000 years before, in the preceding decimillennium, reproduced by the mysterious powers controlling the destinies of our world. There is no prominent character in all the annals of sacred or profane history whose prototype we cannot find in the half-fictitious and half-real traditions and legends of bygone religions or mythologies. As the star, glimmering at an immeasurable distance above our heads in the boundless immensity of the sky reflects itself in the smooth waters of the lake, then so too does the imagery of men of the antediluvian ages reflect itself in the periods that we can embrace in an historical retrospect. As above, so below. That which has been will return again. As in heaven, so on earth. Anything that can be said about the understanding of temporal relations is inevitably vague. This is because our everyday language is inadequate for the spatial expression of temporal relations. We lack the necessary words for it and have no verbal forms for the expression of these relations that are new to us, and therefore some other quite new forms, non-verbal, are indispensable. The language for the transmission of new temporal relations must be a language without verbs. New parts of speech are necessary and an infinite number of new words, as at present with the aid of our human language we can only hint about time. Its true essence is inexpressible for us. We should not underestimate this inadequacy of expression. This is the sign of the truth and the sign of reality. That which can be expressed cannot be true. All systems dealing with the relation of the human soul to time, all ideas of post-mortem existence, the theory of reincarnation, that of the transmigration of souls and of karma, all are symbols attempting to transmit relations that cannot be expressed directly because of the poverty and the weakness of our language. They should not be understood literally any more than it is possible to understand the symbols and the allegories of art literally. It is necessary to search for their hidden meanings, and find that which cannot be expressed in words. The literal understanding of these symbols forms in certain lines of contemporary literature, and the union with this of ideas of evolution and morals taken in the most narrow dualistic meaning, completely disfigures the inner content of these forms, depriving them of their true value and meaning. To hear the song of silence we must reach out and touch the untouchable.